So Alyssa, the question is, who are you?
I haven't answered that question in a hot minute. So I used to go to Temple, for anybody who doesn't know. And Temple, when we have speakers or introduce new people into our spaces, we do the who are you question to get to know everybody. I don't know if you guys do that at Widener. But let's see, who am I? Who am I right now? It's a great question. Well, my name's Alyssa. I'm a recent college graduate. And I'm just kind of being as I am right now.
Cool. Alyssa, who are you?
I graduated in 2019, so I'm the last graduating class. I live in Washington, D.C., and I am trying to figure out what it means to be a good neighbor in a community that I didn't grow up in.
And lastly, Alyssa, who are you?
I am someone who's been through a lot of things, but most importantly, I am a child of the Most High God that I know is following me and watching me through everything that I go through. And I am someone that's really excited to be here tonight, and I'm ready to see where things take us.
You're good.
All right, so like I said before, my name is Alyssa. Hopefully you can hear me. I feel like you can, just because of how loud I am. Like I said before, so I don't have internet. I am still on my family's data plan that, we use together. So I don't have like the gallery view thing. So if you do anything that you want me to see, I can't see everybody, which is kind of sad. But I recognize that y'all are here. I'm going to do a couple things where I'm like, put this in the chat or like react in the chat. And I don't know what happens when I actually open the chat. I don't know if that turns my screen off. So if it does that, I'm still here. I'm just reading the chat. But that's more of like technical stuff. But yeah, like I said before, I live in Washington, D.C. right now. I went from the suburbs of Philly. So I was in Delco, which is where Widener is. Went to Temple, lived in North Philly, and then I bounced up here. I did InterVarsity for, I guess you could say, like 3 years. I did outreach team. I was on leadership team. I led a Bible study with Jakira 1 year. Led upperclassmen Bible study another year. And yeah, edgy Bible study. Oh, God. But this is the first time that I'm like doing a ministry related speaking thing since I've graduated college, which is pretty crazy. I kind of feel like this is a rite of passage. It's actually kind of cool because it was like the fellowship that I was in and then the fellowship that I always hung out with, and you guys couldn't get rid of me. And now we're all together, and I had no idea we were even going to be together until like 3 days ago. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, on top of me not having internet, I also don't own a printer. So all of my notes are on the computer, which is behind you. So if you see me kind of looking into the distance, that is what that is. Okay. Let's get going. So before we get into things, we're going to spend a little time with Paul tonight and a little time in Philippians tonight. I want to tell you a little bit more about my story. So like I said, I moved from Philly to DC. I moved here to teach. I moved here with a lot of questions, and I took a lot of risks. And at the end of college, I was like, I'm ready to bounce. Like, I feel like God is calling me in a direction, and I don't really know what that looks like, but I feel like I'm called to come back here. I did DC plunge a couple times, and after going through the plunge, there was something that was tugging on me, being like, it's time to go back. And there's something in life that I'm calling you to pursue, and I'm not going to let you know what that is yet. So I decided to follow my gut, and I came back here. Like I said before, I took some major risks. We'll talk about this later, but I had a really, really messy first job experience. And as of right now, I'm still trying to figure out what God is, has in store for me and where he's leading me to. But with that, we're going to get into things. So when we did the online justice program, we called the chat box the Amen Corner. So while we're all on the thing, if there's any comments you want to have, or any reactions that you have, or anything you feel like sharing, or if you're someone that engages well by talking to others, like go ahead, you can put it in the chat box to everybody. You can be like, hey, I relate to this. Hey, this makes sense to me. I'm feeling this right now. I got a comment about this. I want to share about this. That's your way to do it. If you want to take notes, not everyone's into taking notes. This isn't a college class. I'm a note taker. That's how I stay engaged. Feel free to do that as well. Zaina prayed us in. So with the technical stuff out of the way, that's hilarious. Amen in Spanish. I can see the bottom of, like, every time you send me a personal message, it's not on the side of my computer, it's right in front of my face. So if you're one of the people in the chat that likes to light me up while I'm speaking, I'm gonna see it while I'm speaking, and you're gonna interrupt the flow of the chat. Anyway, doesn't matter because I'm super excited. All right, so tonight we're gonna be spending some time getting to know our brother Paul a little bit better. I know that things have been wild with the coronavirus situation and with everything that is happening in the world, and everyone is getting super exhausted of sitting at home and looking at a computer, whether that be for school or for work. In my case, applying for jobs, and spending a lot of time on the screen just because of the lack of things that we can do right now. Which, if you can believe it, because I still kind of caught this by surprise, is why I chose some time getting to know Paul when I was getting ready to speak for you. So when I think about things I want to talk about, Paul is never the first thing that comes into my mind. He's mentioned a lot in a lot of churches. We preach on the New Testament a lot. And he's also super prevalent in the Bible. And I like to, like, pump the brakes on things. It's not pump the brakes, but like spend a little time getting to know the things that really hit, the things that kind of stir you and are maybe a little controversial. But yeah, so he's super prevalent in the Bible, and his letters really steer the direction of what we do with the gospel message in the New Testament. And it really seeps into our church history and a lot of the things that we're founded on. Okay. This is something that's super important. I do this all the time. If you were ever in one of my small groups, you know I do this. I'm gonna pretend you're in my apartment right now, even though you're not. So in my house, in my time, we do not read the Bible without getting into any form of historical context. There are some things that I feel like you really, really, really need to know before you open any page of the Bible, just because the world we live in right now is not the world that the Bible was written in. And sometimes when you miss those things, it either makes things confusing or maybe you read it wrong, like, which is fine, and interpretation is also a great thing. But when we're talking about a figure, I'm just going to share a couple bullet points on them. Josh made slides. I have not seen the slides, nor do I know how the slides are going to work, but it's okay. So Paul is formerly Saul of Tarsus, one of the highest Jewish elites. He was one of the largest Christian persecutors in the time of what is known as the early church, before the churches really had buildings. He was absolutely detested by the Jews for heresy after experiencing his major conversion on the road to Damascus, and then became one of the largest, if not the largest, Christian missionary in entire history. He was constantly on watch by Roman government because he was able to stir up people and get people moving. He had 5 major missionary journeys in his life and visited over 50 cities in the Mediterranean area, which is absolutely crazy because there were no cars. And everything is foot travel, or like you use a camel. So imagine doing 5 rounds of 50 cities throughout like 20 years with no car, which is crazy. Okay. He's the author of most of the New Testament letters, and that is where the original churches were formed. So every letter that was written to a city, and that city had a church, which is something I did not know until I was like 20. So I think it's really important to mention. And specifically, we're going to spend some time in Philippians to talk about his story and kind of what he went through. I'm going to be pulling a lot from Philippians. I'm going to call it a mashup, and we're going to spend some time with the arc of Paul's personal experience during this period of time. I've never done something like this before. I'm going to call it like a visualization exercise. So if you're into visualizing, you can close your eyes if that's for you. If you're not and you're kind of like me, I just kind of listen, and that's cool too. And I'm going to pause just a couple times while we use the chat box. So called it Visualizing Paul's Experience. How creative. All right. This is to get us into the headspace of Paul and what he's going through. And I want to give us a snippet of what life was like during this time. So imagine that you are Paul. You have recently made it to Rome, and you are on fire for God. The things that you have seen are beyond what you could have ever imagined. You are one of the few people directly contacted by the massive power of the living God, and you are now moving as quickly as possible to spread what you have learned to the cities around you. You have gone from being rich and powerful and a persecutor to a poor traveler. You are unwavered because you know full well that God is with you at all times, despite the fact that you have lost almost everything. You know what it means to have much, and you know what it means to have little. Before arriving in Rome, you have helped establish the first churches and written to them with your remarks. More people are receiving the good news than ever before, and you are completely convicted to keep going on your mission. While you are out preaching one day, you are approached by a Roman soldier in massive armor. He tells you, "Come with me." He grabs you by the arm and brings you to the place that you have been staying and tells you that you can only come out when he believes that it is acceptable. He tells you that you have to stay at home until the emperor is ready to hold your trial. You ask the soldier why this is happening, and he only tells you that you are being tried by the Roman courts. He's very stern and stoic in facial expression. He walks away without explaining or letting you ask any questions at all. This will be one of the moments where I pause, so go ahead if you want to put in the chat if this helps you engage. How do you feel right now? You were just thrown back into where you were staying. You have no answers. Tell me how you feel. So we got annoyed. That's a good one. Salty. That's a good one. Definitely salty. Confused. Courtney says confused. Anxious and scared. Yeah. Impatient. That's a good one. I am super impatient. You know, Paula said rut row. That's great. Anxiety. Go ahead to keep doing that, and I'm going to keep going. So the night passes, and no one has come to talk to you. The days keep rolling into nights. You have tried to sneak out once, but you are stopped. For concern of your physical safety and hope to continue your ministry, you stay inside. The days roll into weeks, and the weeks roll into months. It has now been about 2 months, and the only way you can correspond with others is by letter. Now I think this is going to be a more relatable version of Paul. But after being forced inside by the government, surrounded by no one, relying on your faith in God and the kindness of others, and attempting to maintain your physical health while being forced to stay at home, how do you feel? So think about what maybe your body's feeling right now, and think about how Paul is probably feeling. You can go ahead, put in the chat some of this relatable content. How do you think we feel right now? Tense. Good. Numb. I'm going to throw up. That's real. I think it might say crazy. I think that's what that said. Trapped. That's a good one. Stressed. Hand cramp. Also a good one. Wait. No, that's fine. Okay. Frustrated. All right. Now, I'm not any type of expert on Bible history at this point in my life. But one thing I did not know before getting, down to the nitty-gritty to write this talk for you, that while writing 1/3 of his letters, it is believed that Paul was forcibly on house arrest in Rome. Historians and tradition go back and forth on this, but we know, so Paul had 2 big arrests, one was 2 years, one was 5 years, that for one of those periods of time, he was locked on house arrest by Roman soldiers, and the other one, he was in a Roman prison cell. And I say history and tradition go back and forth because there's this thing that happens when you study the Bible where there's kind of like this oral tradition camp of what we have said is true, and what gets passed down from our ancestors and from our traditions. And then there's also this very historical cultural camp that takes what life was like back then and really analyzes it with what we see in the scriptures. And both of these things intersect a lot, and they help us have a broader understanding of our own traditions. And I only bring that up in case you were wondering why I said that history and tradition can kind of conflict with each other. But for all intents and purposes, we know that Paul is forced and locked up in a situation that he doesn't want to be in. And whatever, Paul, you resonate with most right now, whether that be on jail or house arrest, is fine with me if that's fine with you. But we do know that through history that both of these things have definitely happened, and he has had both experiences. I want to bring this out because I think it'll make us emotionally connect to Paul as he goes through his uncertain times of processing and unknown waiting. When I usually think about Paul, I think about him only in the context of a historical figure and not a lot of emotion. He's kind of someone that's super above me in a spiritual sense, and it's kind of hard to grasp the fact that he was even a person just because of the ways I've heard other people speak about him. And he's regarded, he's a patron saint. So for a lot of people, that he's like on that upper echelon of tradition. But he's also a person. And I feel like I got to know a lot more of that while going through this. So through this 2-year period, Paul has a lot of time on his hands, and he has a lot of time to think, and he maybe has too much time to think, and maybe he has, a lot of time to sit and dwell on his uncertainties. And I resonate with that because I know that I've been thinking a lot too much, or I said that was a little repetitive. I've been thinking about things too much that, I'm dwelling on them to the point where they're really unhealthy. And if you want to thumb that up or anything in your screen, that's cool, because I've been thinking a whole lot. I ended up in Philippians because when y'all came down here for Urban Plunge, Zaina was like, you should come speak, and if you need some direction, go ahead and do Philippians 2 or wherever God is leading you. And luckily, God led me to Philippians because I don't think I could have found another piece of text that was more relevant or applicable than to what is going on right now in the world. Little did I know before reading this that Paul was not only believed to be on house arrest, but Philippians specifically is a letter of joy. Bible scholars refer to the Philippians letter series as joyful pieces of writing that only express happiness, even though Paul was on personal government-issued stay-at-home order, which to me is pretty incredible, since finding joy during this very dark, trying time, something that a lot of people are really struggling to grasp with, myself included. And we've been in quarantine now for like 5 to 6 weeks, and things are getting stale. Looking on computers is burning my eyes at this point. Fun fact, I had to put parent lock on my phone because my screen time was so high, I literally couldn't look at it anymore. So I have a phone parent now. Online papers are getting old, and the ever infamous college discussion board, which is my least favorite assignment in history, are probably getting really frustrating. Zoom calls are taking place for us instead of hanging out with our own friends. And in my case, attempting to find a job for any form of work at all because the unemployment rates are so high is kind of wild. But none of those things take place of what we've had before, being in community with friends and being in positions where we're more stable and we have more control over what's going on. We don't have a lot of comfort right now because we don't have a lot of answers. We're waiting for authorities to give us information, but there is not a lot of information to receive because we're still learning it every day. Things are changing. And I'm not sure about Philadelphia and Chester yet, but as of yesterday, DC moved to face mask required at all times. And it's a little eerie. When you go outside as minimally as possible and you look around and all the people have to have their whole face covered, I didn't even know until I tried to go to CVS, and I almost got chased out of CVS today because they were like, you have to have a face mask. And I was like, I don't know how I missed this. But yeah, it feels dark. It feels dystopian. There's a very legitimate fatigue that is starting to happen from sitting down for too long and listening to bad news on a regular basis. I'm not sure about everybody else, but I've heard more about the death count, the upcoming election, the struggles of hospital workers and essential employees, and the failures of the American economic system than anything else over the past month. We're all living in a state of what if, and there is not a lot to look forward to. And if you feel so led, if you want to put something in the chat that you feel like you can't stop hearing about, go ahead. This is your time to share out if you would so like. But so with all of this being said, let's take what we know as a reality now and what we know about Paul's reality and channel it into this greater understanding of Paul and what we're hoping to gain together. While we sit and feel all the darkness, somehow Philippians is still a letter of joy. And Paul is not always the most joyful of people. He's very serious about his ministry, and I find it so interesting that he wrote a letter of joy during a time that only presents silent chaos. He's managing to write scrolls of text, but still appears content. He's a man who cannot go about doing the very thing he knows that it is his God-given call to do, and yet he still has joy. In the opening of Philippians, it says, I thank my God every time I remember you. In all of my prayers for all of you, I pray with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. Being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it out onto completion until the day of Jesus Christ. It is right for me to feel this way about you all, since I have you in my heart, and whether I am in chains or defending or confirming the gospel, all of you share in God's grace with me. God can testify how I long for all of you with the affection of Jesus Christ. Philippians 1:3-8. So right off the bat, we get this moment here where we not only see Paul admitting his loss, he says that he's in chains. He's admitting how much he longs for his community and partnership with other people. He's not denying what he knows he needs. He says that he prays in joy when he remembers others because it is the only thing he has to hold on to. And he's living in a moment in time where everything is out of his control. He's reminding the Philippians that even though they cannot be together, he can find delight in the fact that he knows that God is moving with or without him through a situation that he cannot control. He can find comfort in knowing that there are people in this world that are taking part in the redeeming work of Jesus, even though he's unable to be with them in person. Paul does this really interesting thing a lot. It's like this metaphysical thing where he recognizes the difference between like the body and the spirit. And I think it's really powerful because he's recognizing that while his flesh is forced away from other people, that they are still connected in one in the spirit. And that's bringing everybody closer together. And he's trusting that this invisible force of good that he cannot see or feel is ever present and always moving. And that to me shows a really profound understanding of how God moves. You know, God is sometimes slow and purposeful. He shows a deep love for others and an even deeper love for Jesus. And by admitting that even through separation, there is a bond that can tie everybody together outside the realm of what we can't imagine, is really, really, really beautiful. Paul continues on in his letters to say, now I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. That's Philippians 1:12-14. So here, Paul is not only admitting his personal loss once again, but he is fully aware that without his personal loss, the gospel cannot be strengthened. Sometimes when we think about sharing the gospel, these images pop into our heads that, you know, are like missions trippy or street preachers or things that feel very colonial and very empirical in essence and nature. And we also get reminded of things like unconsensual conversion or war or physical violence. But that's not what we're talking about. This is spreading the gospel in a very pure form. And the gospel that Paul is talking about here isn't about furthering a disgruntled message of fire and brimstone. It's the message of having people who are now coming to know Jesus understand the promise of him more fully through his own struggles. It's a good news of everlasting love and the promise of a better tomorrow. The true message of Jesus that emphasizes love and acceptance, no matter Jew nor Gentile, and strengthening the hope that might not have existed before in a time where physical warfare and inconsistency are a regular thing. You know, right now, the year is only like 61 AD, and the world is not what it is today. I forget what the saying is, but it's like, all of the problems in the world we have seen before, that kind of thing. And that is true, but like the opportunities exist and how things have changed are incredibly different. And back then, the value for human life is much more diluted. Who is seen as equal is incredibly drastic and also incredibly scary depending on which city you live in and who's in charge. Paul has a genuine appreciation and love for the people who are out in the world serving while he cannot. This is much like all of the essential workers and nurses who risk their lives every day. And the people who are intentionally putting themselves on the front lines to help the older people that live around them, or the people who are sending food and money to others who are struggling and attempting to get by during trying times. Much like myself. Once again, he's seeing the movement of God through his knowledge of the Spirit while he is still forced to be stilled. Here he is not dwelling on loss, and he's recognizing it, and he's naming it, and he's finding positive things that are happening through a God who refuses to stop moving, even though we are personally halted. This is something that is really hard for me because I'm also one of those people that's like constantly moving. And when I think about someone who has literally had an encounter with the ever-living God and is bopping around cities like no tomorrow, I don't know how you go to, you know, hundreds and hundreds of cities within 15 years on foot and on camel. And he's just like, he just has to stop. Like, I don't know. It's like the most massive adrenaline crash of all time, but it's also super unhealthy. Because that happens to me. I don't know if that's a relatable experience. But yeah, I can't imagine attempting to find positivity within the mess when it's not easy. I know I've had plenty of days where I've been waiting around and life just feels like an ongoing void of not knowing. And I imagine that a lot of people in here feel the same way. It's just like, wake up, online school, don't feel like doing online school, Zoom call, text message, video chat. I can't go outside. Okay. So I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna shift tones a little bit. All of my texts are color-coded, and we're about to get to a new color. So we're going from teal to dark purple. How exciting. All right. So Paul is exuding with joy for his church. He's getting amped up on behalf of the strength of others who are finding through his season of life. Now, I think this is something we really need to think about. Right? I just talked about that huge adrenaline crash when you just keep going and everything stops. We see joy in Paul's writing and we see confidence, but we also see a struggle. We see the season of the outside world being different from the season that Paul is personally experiencing. And I think that's really important to name because even though we're all experiencing this quarantine, we're all probably in a very different place while experiencing this quarantine. Everyone has a different struggle. Everyone has a different life. And we can't kind of like blanket that under one experience, even though we're all in community experiencing this quarantine. And in church, like seasons gets thrown around a lot and it gets brought up. And usually when we think about seasons, we kind of go from like one extreme to the other. So there's the season of like, wow, like God is so present right now. All of these great things are happening to me. I finally overcame this hard time. All these wonderful events are going on. New relationships are forming. My career is getting better. You know, everyone's happy and you feel like everything's going right. And there's seasons that bear fruit and they make you really excited, all that kind of stuff. Or we go to this other extreme, right? And we call them like hard seasons or dark seasons. And we're like, I'm experiencing like a really hard season right now. I lost this person, or I lost this thing. And I went through this horrible experience that I still haven't gotten over. Money is hard. My family is struggling, and I'm genuinely not okay. I feel like I'm gasping for air in a world that only feels dark. And I don't know where God is. I don't know if God is listening, or if God cares, or if he even exists at all. Because what I'm going through right now is so strong, I feel like I can't bear it. And that's real. Both of those things are really real. But when we name them, like I just said, we go from like really good to like really bad. But as human beings, we don't only exist in extremes. We're not always really bad or really good. A lesson that I'm learning myself literally every single day, because I'm one of those people that goes from neutral to super ramped up in like a second. And it's not always the best way to be, but it does happen. And I'm working on it. And there is this season that's in between that we all genuinely think I know exists, but I feel like we don't name it that much or talk about it. And it's a season I had never considered until my pastor, his name is Watson. This is being recorded. So Watson, if you ever see this, this is your shout out. Christ City, DC. Great people. But he spoke on this thing, right? In a service around, I think November, probably like before Christmas. And he named this season, I had never heard of before, and it was the season of waiting. I'm sitting there, I'm like, wait. And he says it again. It's like the season of waiting. And I'm like, I need to think about this. Right? The season of waiting is like the season of limbo. It's the season of, I really don't know what's going on right now, but I know that the sun is setting every day, and I'm just being as I can. It's that time in the middle of the really good and the really bad when most of life happens. And it's a time of life that tends to feel most fleeting when you look back on it. When you think about milestones, it's not when you turn 16, when you can drive a car, or 18, when you can, I don't know, go to adult prison. Because that's what happens when you turn 18, or 21 when you can go to a bar. It's when you turn like 24. Which is kind of crazy because I'm getting around that. Or like 33. Things that are milestones in their own regard. But like 24 and 33 are milestones in their own right, but they're not necessarily regarded as like the big day. And while Paul is on his house arrest, he's not exactly thriving. And he isn't totally suffering either. He's forced inside with minimal contact, like most of us are right now, with the outside world. He's truly in a season of waiting, and he's trusting in God, unknowing of when his sentence will end, and trying to find joy in the things that God is providing him with. Most of these things just being stories from other people that maybe walked by his window, or a letter dropped off by a Roman soldier. Nothing grand, but something small enough that he figures out how to make meaning of. He spends his time writing to others and remembering them frequently and fondly. Someone in history that also does this well is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He's a man who wrote ever important and always needed letters from the Birmingham jail. He's a man who knows the world needs his words, but he is forced inside of a jail because those who do not want to listen are in charge. While Paul is waiting, he is fully aware that he needs to wait. And he knows that he is waiting, but he is not upset about it. And he doesn't walk around kicking the walls and grumbling about the season of life he's in. He even writes in Philippians, do everything without grumbling or arguing. Continue to work out your salvation without fear and without trembling, for it is God who works in you. Philippians 2, so that's 14 and 12 to 13. He does not complain to God about how this is inconveniencing him or believes that God has forgotten about him. Well, I am sure he has his moments alone because, don't we all do that? We're only people. Back in the day when you were waiting to go on trial with the Roman government, nobody cared about your well-being. You could be sitting for years on end without hearing any news at all. there's also a lot of parallels you can make between waiting for a trial today and waiting for a trial back when Paul was waiting for his own. As we know, our government systems still do not lack the corruption that they had during his time. But even knowing all of this, Paul still found a semblance of contempt during his season of life. We know this because in Philippians 4, Paul continues on to say, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And in the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Jesus Christ. I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content with the circumstances. I know what it is like to be in need, and I know what it is like to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in every and any situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I still do all of this for him who gives me strength." Philippians 4, 5-7, and 11-12. And we know that Paul knows this because Paul knows that God and how that God works. After all, he was one of the biggest Jewish elites of all times. He is fully aware of the stories of his people. He used to prosecute Christians thinking that they were heretics on his own religion. You know, these stories are ones that include walking around in the desert for 40 years or 500 years of absolute silence. You know, Paul knows a God that works over time, and even though we don't always see that movement, we see it eventually, either when we like pass different milestones or, you know, different seasons that we're all going through together. Paul knows a God that said, "Let there be light." The God who said, "Let there be stars in the sky," and a king made a man that walked amongst the people as the servant of the world to suffer through all of the brokenness that we have created for our own selves and pay the price that all of us humans are unable to afford. Paul knows that there is suffering, but he knows that the suffering is not permanent. And there is a spirit on the move at all times that has led him to his contempt place. And I hope I'm not talking too fast. I feel like I did this a lot faster than I expected to, which is fine. So I'm going to give you another like 30 seconds before I start talking to you a little bit about my experience in the season of waiting. There's this a saying, right? It's like people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I feel like a lot of that is expressed through realness. So we're going to get a little real. And I'm going to tell you about some of my story, and then we're going to keep moving. So let me talk to you about my story and the stuff that's been going on with me. So I think maybe like half of you guys know me. And like I said earlier, when I was at Temple, I was ready to bounce. Like I was like, get to go. We got to get out of here. I've done the things. I've seen the things. I've lived in the Philadelphia area my whole life. You know, I'm finally figuring out what it means to have a faith of my own, and I'm ready to walk in that faith and follow that faith and do all those things. And I did speak on this a couple times when I was at Temple. I guess all the alumni aren't there anymore, so not everybody's been here through the whole journey. But I remember doing this activity where we all had to write words about what we wanted for the semester on these like leaves, and we all pasted them onto this tree portrait thing. Tosin made it. And I forget what my word was, but basically it was about how I didn't feel like I had a place at Temple, and I felt like I was being called in another direction for some inexplicable reason, you know, to a city that I had never lived in before. And it had nothing to do with like Temple itself or like the people or anything that was going on. It was just like, it's that tugging on your heart that's really hard to describe when it's going on, and you know that God is saying something to you and you feel like you have to follow it, and you try to explain it, and a lot of people think you're crazy, but you do it anyway because you know that it's the direction that you're being called in. And I did that in like 2017. I think that happened in 2017. So, you know, we take the plunge, we're ready to go, we're thinking about life, we're doing new things. And I was hell-bent. I told myself, hell or high water. I was coming back to DC because Spirit was moving and I needed to be here. So my avenue of getting here was probably not the best. I graduated Temple with an education degree, secondary education, and I did a teaching program that I'm not going to name because this is being recorded right now. And I would not like to receive emails from them. So if you want to ask me about it later, go ahead. But I did a teaching program that promises this, all-encompassing picture of justice in education and bridging educational inequity. And they promised me the city that I wanted to go back to, and they promised me a job. But there was a lot of things that I had a lot of questions about, and there's a lot of things I was kind of uncertain of, and I decided to go through with it because I knew that God was calling me to come back to Washington, D.C., and I was going to do it. But there was something about the steps that I was taking that didn't feel right. But it didn't matter because I was like, I need to move. So I'm going to do it anyway. So I'm like treading with caution the whole time. This is a whole summer program that was going on. And yeah, I'm like working through doubts, and through the course of completing this like summer training thing, big air quotes, that they have, my doubts were getting bigger, and I was thinking about them every single day. I was like, is this justice? Is this what God wants? Is God really moving in this? And I was still set on DC, so I was being confident with it and, being like, this is what I got to do to get where I need to go. And I don't really believe that I should be an English teacher at all. But I'm going to do it anyway because this is how I'm going to get there. I'm going to try and I'm going to see what happens. And I just felt so not good about it, but I kept doing it. So I'm doing this summer program, and there's already a lot of doubt, and I'm like, bro, I got to do this for 2 years. I start thinking, being like, I'm about to put my life on pause for 2 years, and then God can work with me. I was like, is that what God wants? Is that how this is supposed to work? And halfway through this summer program, so this is like super real, I experienced one of the greatest losses and probably the most traumatizing experience I've ever had in my entire life. It had nothing to do with the program, and I'm not going to get into a lot of the details. It's one of those things you asked me about later. But I lost somebody, not because they died. And anytime that you lose people that really, really matter to you, it hurts. There is a mark that is left, and there are words left unsaid, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and it's not easy. And depending on your circumstances, you're not always aware of the outcome or what, like, why did God let this happen? Why is this going on? So I'm filled with doubt. I'm emotionally distraught. I'm trying to grieve the loss of this person. And I'm going to be honest, I have come to realize that I have problems with loss. I really have some big issues with loss that hit my heart in a way that other things don't hit me. And I moved to DC in a major rush because this teaching program did not give me a location officially until the 30th of July. So I signed a job and had to jump into this training. And during this time, I was sleeping on people's floors for 6 weeks. I had nowhere to live. I didn't know what I was doing. My bank account was acting funny, so I wasn't able to deposit money super hot. And I was like relying on a lot of like people I barely knew. Like I was just meeting people and being like, hey, can I stay on your floor? So that was a leap of faith for me too. It was something I'd never done. And I started this teaching job that at the start seemed okay, but the only thing that it did was show me what it was like to be a puppet inside of a system that isn't doing what it needs to do to respect the image of God in everybody. I come from this InterVarsity background and this DC plunge background, this gateway background, and I get to this place that has absolutely no regard for what it means to genuinely care about somebody. And in a school that's really hard because those people, they're not adults. Those people are children. And that there was just so much dissonance and like so much internal conflict going on. And during this 8-month period of my life, the disconnect that I felt from God was so awful, and I don't think I've ever had a worse experience. Um, it's being 22 has been the hardest year I've ever had, and I feel like that sounds really dramatic because I'm still super young. Um, but man, I'm not shook easily. But did it rock me? Did it kick me? I felt like a soccer ball. It was a time of my life where every morning you wake up and you feel like you have bricks on your shoulders, or you're crying at night, or you're not sleeping and you don't have anyone to talk to, even though you have people to talk to, but you're so miserable that you're just not talking to anybody. You're trusting people that don't deserve your trust, and then they end up hurting you because you don't know what else to do. You feel worthless. You feel like you can't do anything. This, honestly, this right now is probably a really powerful moment because this is the most like Alyssa thing that I've done probably since I graduated school. Like, this is the most me space where I feel like I have potential again, which sounds really sad and very not like me if you know me at all. But it's been rough. It's been real rough. And during this whole time, I'm like, God, do you hear me? Do you know that I'm here? Do you know what I'm going through, or like why this is happening? And I genuinely don't know what you're trying to show me right now, because I've never felt further from you or more confused in my entire life. At this point, I'm beyond miserable, and I'm falling in this huge dark pit, and I don't know how I'm supposed to get out, because every time I'm convinced things cannot get any worse, they did. They really did. And again, ask me about it after, just because this is going on the internet, and I don't want to put a lot of, things on the internet. But I think as I was like writing this out, because Captain was like, you should definitely talk about your personal experience. I started to think, and I was like, a lot of people are probably wondering why that I wouldn't consider this just like a hard season of life, and why I would consider this a season of waiting. And the reason is because like I'm still waiting, right? These things aren't messy, and hard things did happen, but for me, this is an overarching story of what God has in store for me in my own life, and how God has moved in the past, even though bad things have happened. But it's been this process and this journey of like how God is bringing me here and what he's having me do here. And there's been like a lot of little pockets of like good things that have happened, and some really cool things have happened in the past month. But like, we're still in the time of virus. I've made no money in 2 months. I live in the most expensive city in the country. I'm unemployed. I don't have answers in the near future because we don't know when the world's going to open up. I'm navigating the system right now on how to receive benefits and how to receive food stamps and all these things that I've never encountered before. And I am genuinely out here on my savings account and the grace of God and the kindness of other people. My life is not easy. Things have been wild. And I still see this as a season of growth and a season of waiting, because these are the things that are going to take me where I need to go. These are the experiences that I need to have to connect with other people. These are things that happen, and I'm not resentful to God about how these things are happening or why they're happening. I'm just putting my faith and my knowledge in the fact that I do follow a God that knows and that sees and that hears me as I am right now, and a promise of Jesus that is going to restore all of the craziness in this world. Because I think the more brokenness you see, the more it hits you, and it hits you differently. And especially when you're doing it by yourself, things just change. The way you experience changes, and the way you process and cope with stress and all those things change. And much like Paul, to kind of, remember him, that everything that's going around me is completely uncontrollable. Everything is out of my control. Everything. But one really good thing that has happened out of all of this is that after my first, career ended, I made a promise with God that I would never intentionally walk down a path that he wasn't actually providing for me again. Which has been really important, because when the Spirit moves, you know, and when there's peace, it comes from God. And it's just so crazy that I think about some of the decisions that I made knowing that they were very incorrect, and I did them anyway because I was like, no, I think this is what God wants. And God works through all that too. There's no punishments. You know, God doesn't punish you for decisions that you've made when you're trying to discern on his will, which is probably a much deeper theological conversation. And I'm not going to get into that right now. But, you know, every day since then, I've sat waiting and prayerfully knowing that while I'm waiting, you know, the world's going to keep moving and God is with me the whole time. And I'm figuring out what it means to be content, even though it's really hard, despite all the answered questions. But the more time goes on, the more my hope grows and the stronger my faith gets. And the more I recognize where God is moving around me and in me when I'm forced to be still. And I'm not someone who is still, ever. Oh my God, there was like, when I was a senior, I was sleeping for like 3 hours a night because I was like, I gotta do more things. I just need to do more things, which I'm not recommending. That's not the way you need to live your life. It's also not the way God wants you to live your life. So being forced to be still, I think, has grown me in a lot of really productive ways. And moving on from that, I'm gonna wrap this up with a little bit of an ending. So at the end of all the waiting, Paul sees unending joy, and he knows that within his promise of Jesus is a better tomorrow, and he sees hearts full and people excited and families united and love unbounding and all the other things that so many of us are craving right now. We're coming off of Easter Sunday, which is a time to remember that there was always light found on the other side of darkness. And I hope that at the end of this pandemic, we realize what it means to struggle and to struggle together, and that we have a deeper appreciation for each other as a country and as a world. I hope we have a better understanding of what it means to love our neighbor and to take joy in things while we feel like we're stuck and there's still something that's moving. I think that through this, many of us will realize how great it is to be close with people and how absolutely critical it is to have a community. I know that during this time, we're all in a different place. And maybe you're in a place where you want some contentment, but it's really hard to find because of all the unknowns. I mean, I get it. Trying to find content in the midst of a really bad storm is almost impossible. And being content isn't something that we always feel like we can try to do or even achieve. And if that's you right now, I just want you to know that there is a spirit moving around you when you cannot feel it and when you cannot see it and when you cannot hear it. And I pray that you use maybe something you've learned tonight or something you've heard or just the time and the space to reflect about Jesus and God and his message and turn it into something positive or something that fills you with hope. And for me personally, I hope that at the end of this pandemic, I better understand what it means to struggle as a collective body. And I hope that you do as well. And I'm currently working on what that actually means and what that actually looks like. And if this is something you're interested in, or, you know, you feel like you've been exploring since we're all in this fluffy, like weird void state, I would invite you into that space with me. You know, a space of learning and a space of growth and a space of messing up, but that being okay, because we're supposed to figure it out together. Something I am learning is that you should never bear your crosses alone, and you should never face your struggles by yourself. You know, we're made to go through things together. I invite you to maybe attempt embracing a season of waiting, and maybe attempting to find contentment if that's something you feel like you're able to do with other people, because these things are not hard. And like I keep saying, they should never be entered into alone. For we know that God did say that it is not good for man to be alone. And I have two statements for you all to end this night that I felt like were applicable. If you're into Bible verses, there's like, when you have like study Bibles, you have a verse per chapter that's like, oh, this is the, you know, the theme of the chapter or whatever. So for Philippians, it is rejoice in the Lord always, and I will say it again, rejoice, which is Philippians 4:4. Or if you're someone who resonates more with music, I don't want to call it pop culture because I feel like that's not correct. And if when I start saying this, you will probably figure out what song this is, and I hope that you do. And if we were together, I'd be like, yo, hit the song. But even when I don't see it, you're working. And even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop. You never stop working. You never stop. You never stop working. Because you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. And our God, that is who you are. And with that, I am done.